gospel reading this morning comes from the gospel according to Mark. It should be found on page 849 in your Pew Bible, if you would like to follow along. In the last week of his life, Jesus warned his disciples concerning trials that were to come upon them and upon the world. He exhorts the listener, do not be alarmed. A reading from the gospel according to Mark. As Jesus came out of the temple, one of his disciples said to him, "Look, teacher, what large stones and what large buildings!" Then Jesus asked him, "Do you see these great buildings? Not one stone will be left here upon another. All will be thrown down." When he was sitting on the Mount of Olives opposite the temple, Peter, James, John, and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when will this be? What will be the sign that all these things are about to be accomplished?" And Jesus began to say to them, "Beware that no one leads you astray. Many will come in my name and say, 'I am he,' and they will lead many astray. When you hear of wars and rumors of wars, do not be alarmed. This must take place, but the end is still to come. For nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. There will be earthquakes in various places. There will be famines. This is but the beginning of the birth pains." This is the gospel of our Lord. Now we live with an apocalyptic imaginary. We imagine in movies and literature the end of the world again and again. Even if we imagine a new world, the end has to be more and more violence and destruction. Today we don't need an imaginary. Recent events in Beirut and Paris and countless others cause us to realize the apocalypse all too closely. As we look at our apocalyptic imagination this morning, may we find that we are able to respond faithfully to our apocalyptic realities. In 1972, Russ Doughton and Donald Thompson formed Mark IV Pictures to produce Christian movies with the intent of spreading the gospel. The first 4 movies they released were a series based on the end times. They were A Thief in the Night, A Distant Thunder, Image of the Beast, and The Prodigal Planet. The movies were in many ways the cultural forerunners of the Left Behind series of books and movies that came out starting in 1995 by Tim LaHaye and Jerry James. A Thief in the Night and Left Behind both pick up on an apocalyptic imaginary and a particular narrative of the end times. Both fictions imagine the reality of a rapture, where believers are captured out of this world before God punishes the world as it is fit for turning away from God. For these folks, they would find a pointer to this fiction in our reading from Daniel, where we read about a time of distress such as never has occurred since nation until that time. And at that time, your people, everyone who is written in the book, will be rescued. You have terribly amazing distress, and some who are rescued or saved from that distress. Here's the thing. Most Christian churches and biblical scholars condemn rapture theology as a distortion of Christian faith with little biblical basis. Critics represent the whole spectrum of churches, from the conservative Missouri Synod Lutherans to evangelicals, to Roman Catholics and liberal Presbyterians. Many evangelical churches and leaders oppose the notion of the rapture, pointing out that it is a recent and idiosyncratic development in Christian teaching. The problem is that all of this institutional criticism is essentially irrelevant. Those who like to talk about the rapture
are amazingly popular and reach a pretty wide audience and have captured their imaginations. And we have to be honest. Part of the success of Left Behind is that it came out right as we were about to enter the new millennium, and at such times our minds are always captured with millennium fever, and you can see it if you go back to literature 1,000 years old. As the millenarian conscience faded, all we had left was this dispensational rapture theology. When examined, reveals a pretty flimsy human construction. Dispensationalists will argue that their system rests on solid biblical evidence, yet their arguments are convoluted and complex, relying on dubious gaps. To make sense, their biblical chronology must combine bits and pieces of the Bible written many centuries apart under very different circumstances into one overarching narrative. Surely this is not how John, nor Matthew, nor any of the other biblical writers intended their writings to be used, as bits and pieces to be cut and pasted into an end times formula. The Bible is neither puzzle pieces to be fitted together, nor isolated verses to be mined for predictive code. Ironically, in their effort to interpret the Bible literally and consistently, proponents of the rapture have mangled the biblical witness almost beyond recognition. So it is the Bible itself, this wonderfully diverse and complex witness to God and Christ that has been left behind. I realize some of you may be grinding your teeth a little at this moment. You've been taught the rapture, you believe in the rapture, you have faith in the rapture. For this reason, I've asked Cal to let me teach the Bible study after service this morning. And we'll wade into all the complexity of this, and we will be hospitable to those with different views, and we will look at the scriptures in more time than we have here and now. So if you're not curious about any of that, if you're not interested in what arguments may pop up, then go ahead, run your errands, go home, watch the football. You don't need to stick around. But if you would like to stick around, we would love to have you. But that is that. Right now, we spent a lot of time saying what this passage doesn't mean. We should probably take a few moments to talk about what our passages do mean. In our gospel reading, Jesus tells the disciples to make sure that no one misleads them. Don't be a sucker. Don't get duped. And let's be honest, in the next few days, in the last couple of days, there has already been a lot of conversation about how we've been misled, how if we hadn't been misled and weren't so naive, realities might have been different. How do we avoid being misled? I think the first thing is to acknowledge that we will be misled. We can't avoid it. There's not enough intelligence or information. There's not enough education or experience. We will be misled. That acknowledgement is huge and will help us avoid being misled. Second thing that I think is hugely important is humility. Because as we cultivate humility, we recognize that we can be misled. We're not ashamed that we have been to come back at the re-entering it and say, ooh, I started down this path and it was the wrong path. By keeping ourselves in that humble spirit, we will avoid not only being misled because we're aware of the danger, but also we won't get misled far because we're able back. The other thing I'd like to say about this leads us into the letter to Hebrews. And there we read this morning, you may have caught it, don't forsake gathering together as some are wont to do. Certainly us preachers love to hammer in on this, don't forsake gathering together. The problem is we're always preaching to the proverbial choir more literally than we care to admit. The people we want to hear us, the people we want in our pews listening to us aren't here. The people we're telling them to be here are here. So we'll yell and scream about that too much. Here's why, even when I'm not preaching, even when I'm not in worship, I come preaching. Because I'm not the smartest guy in the room. When I have an idea, hey, isn't this a great idea? I need to be around people who say, no, that's not such a great idea. Let's read the passage again. Let's see what it says. Maybe you got it wrong. I need to be in the midst of that community. I need to be kept safe by being part of it. I want to say one more thing about this gathering together, the communities into which we gather. As I get older, I like my religion more vetted. When I was younger, I liked the more freelance preachers who weren't as constrained. But the older I get, I'm less comfortable with the church of what and what on the corner. I'd rather go worship with the Presbyterians on a Sunday, even though their theology causes me some angst, because I know that that community transcends place and time. It has history, it has organization. It's not just found on that one little corner in that one little town. I know that that preacher in that community has been vetted by a larger community that's kind of kept some of the dangerous things at bay, screened some of the ways in which they approach what it is they teach. I realize there are problems with bureaucracies and institutions. When it comes to being misled, there's something good to being slow, because by the time you get around to adopting the new idea, you may have figured out what was wrong with the new idea, and being in those bureaucracies and institutions can help us. I remember at a time being a part of a much younger movement within the church, looking at the Catholic Church responding to a similar issue. Well, we probably took a weekend to figure out. They took years. No, that can be frustrating and agonizing, painful. It does help us avoid being misled and move slower and more carefully. Sometimes the things we think are really important, we have to do right now, are things we have to do right now. We should challenge those institutions. Other times, it's good to be slow. So I think those are ways in which we help avoid being misled. But that's enough. The passage to Hebrews, as I said, you're already here. And that brings us back to our passage in the book of Daniel. Now, the passage we've read is smack in the middle of a visionary account that starts in chapter 10 and ends at the back of the book. The vision is full of political realities that, had we been alive when it was written, we would have understood. If we really want to understand what Daniel is talking about, his image of distress, we would be good to go back into that historical setting and to really pull apart some of the illusions that we certainly lose being this far removed from. The truth is, we can imagine a distress on the level that the text does. We're so familiar with it, we refer to it in shorthand. We have little names. The Great Depression, Auschwitz, 9/11, Syria, European immigration, and on and on. And yet, this week we added Paris and Beirut to the list again. Because once again, they have become ground zero for an apocalyptic reality that shapes our world. We know that in the midst of these living hells, some will be rescued. We may not know the specificity of Daniel's vision. We have some sense of what he's talking about. When he talks about distress and those will be rescued, we get it. Certainly there's hope in that image. I think that Daniel offers us an image that is filled with even more hope. Those who have insight will shine brightly like the expanse of heaven. Those who lead many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Do we not speak of luminaries? About those individuals who shed light in the darkness? We call them our better lights, right? We understand this language. We use it all the time. We know what it is to live in dark times. They are not new, nor are they a rarity in our history. If I can borrow a few words from my daughter's namesake, I would put it like this. Even in the darkest of times, we have the right to expect some illumination. That such illumination may well come less from theories and concepts than from the uncertain, flickering, and often weak light of some men and women in their lives and in their works, will kindle under almost all circumstances and shed over the time span that was given to them on earth. As recent events have reminded us, we know what it is to live in darkness. We have known darkness of an apocalyptic reality in the streets of Paris, and as many have reminded us, that darkness is found elsewhere. You remember Kosovo, Rwanda, Darfur, Syria, Katrina, the World Trade Center. This list is all too brief. Our minds, our memories, our attention can't hold all these places. We know what it is to live in darkness, but we should also know that we have a right, as it were, to expect some illumination. On Friday night and Saturday morning, first responders in a country across the ocean responded to that nightmare and brought light into the darkness, order into the chaos. Where there was pain, they brought comfort. Where there were wounds, they brought healing. When terror and prejudice promised more darkness, we saw and heard those who brought light into the world and told us there could be another way. We don't have to choose hate. We don't have to choose fear. We don't have to choose prejudice. When darkness comes through terror or hate, we should always remember to look for the light. And when you can't find it, when the world seems dark, no one else is shining forth the light. In that way, recognize that you may be the one who is called to shed light in darkness. Live faithfully, and trust that God will be with you, that Christ will empower you, and that the light of the world will shine through you in the darkness and make a difference. There is a lot in Daniel's vision that is confusing, disorienting, and feels irrelevant. Who is Michael? What is this system? And then in the midst of it, as we're wondering why we're even bothering to read it, what relevance does it have to our lives? We find words that are supremely relevant, maybe even eternally. Those who have insight will shine, do shine, brightly like the expanse of heaven. And those who lead many to righteousness, like the stars forever